Move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? Give the call to the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. On the 14th of November, Royal Australian Navy divers from HMAS Toowoomba were deliberately injured by sonar pulses fired from a Chinese Navy destroyer. The following day, the Prime Minister travelled to San Francisco, where he met with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Did the Prime Minister personally raise this serious issue with President Xi?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the Leader for his question. The government expressed concerns about the HMAS Toowoomba incident clearly, directly, unambiguously. This event was unsafe and was unprofessional. We communicated this through all appropriate channels and with every opportunity that was available to us. Every opportunity. This government has worked hard to stabilise the relationship with China without compromising any of our core interests. We have been patient, calibrated and deliberate in our approach. I note the opposition said I shouldn't go to APEC during that week. They demanded that I not go.
Members on my left. The Minister for Home Affairs will cease interjecting. Members on my right will cease interjecting so I can hear from the Leader of the Opposition on point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. It was a very straight question. It requires a straight answer. The question was, did the Prime Minister personally raise this serious incident with President Xi?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. What we won't be doing is taking lectures on how to build our diplomatic relations with those opposite, who could not get a phone call returned for the entire term of the last government.
Order. The Minister for Pacific Island Affairs. The Leader of the Opposition on another point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I seek clarification from you as to whether it's your ruling that the Prime Minister is in order in relation to this response.
Well, the Prime Minister had about 8 seconds until you took that point of order. So if you give him, I think it would be a reasonable request to say he's halfway through his answer, and I'm going to listen. You may want a simple answer, but the Prime Minister can answer the question how he sees fit.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, because those opposite think that foreign relations are simple. Threats of shirt fronting, leaking of private text messages, leaking of private conversations, which meant that there was no possibility of getting outcomes. And I make this point, Mr Speaker, that compared with the $85 million of exports on those products that suffered from trade impediments last year, this year, up until just August, $6 billion of those products had gone to China. $6 billion. And when we talk about yes or no, you might like to ask yes or no
Members on my left.
as to whether Chang Lei thinks that our approach towards diplomatic relations is more effective than yours. And you can talk to her because she's now in Melbourne with her family. With her family. The fact is that we now have a path forward for wine exports. We say as well that we'll cooperate with China where we can, we'll disagree where we must.
For Gippsland.
And I note the HMAS Toowoomba then travelled to the Taiwan Straits and is currently involved in exercises with the Philippines Navy as a direct result of the deal that I signed with President Marcos just a couple of months ago.
Give the call to the member for Wills.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How is the Albanese Labor government working to deliver reliable electricity? Are there any threats to this approach?
The call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for his question and his very strong leadership in his electorate on matters of climate change and, of course, here in Canberra as well. And, Mr Speaker, of course, last week the Albanese government did announce a very significant step to ensure that our transition to renewable energy is more orderly and faster, Mr Speaker, and that's necessary for a number of reasons. Of course, we all know that renewable energy is very good for emissions, but also this is a vital step to ensure the reliability of our energy system. After a decade in which 4 gigawatts of dispatchable power left the grid and only 1 gigawatt came on, we knew that we had to act to ensure that new energy is introduced to the system before old energy leaves. The previous government had an approach of leaving it until after coal-fired power stations close. We take the approach of getting the investment on ahead of those changes, Mr Speaker. And this is important for reliability because the average age of Australia's coal-fired fleet is 33 years. And inevitably, after many decades of service, coal-fired power stations increasingly encounter issues. In fact, today, Mr Speaker, as we speak, there are 9 coal-fired power stations across Australia with 1 or more units out of action. And that equates to about 3.8 gigawatts of power we do not currently have access to. And if we'd had a better regime in place to get more investment on earlier, we wouldn't be so reliant on that increasingly unreliable source of energy, Mr Speaker. Now, this is very important for Australian industry, it's important for Australian households. And that's why the announcement last week has been so broadly welcomed, not just by climate groups, not just by energy groups, by the Australian Industry Group, by the Australian Energy Users Association, by the Australian Aluminium Council, Mr Speaker, who referred to this announcement as being crucial for Australia's energy future. Now, Mr Speaker, as important as last week's announcement was, it is not, of course, the only important announcement. In fact, last year, working very closely together, the Minister for Resources, the Minister for Industry, the Treasurer and I announced the gas code which is necessary. Now, there has been a disallowance moved in the Senate by the Greens, Mr Speaker. They say they don't like gas. Order. They want to rip up the only regulation of gas, Mr Speaker. This code requires new gas supply to be supplied to Australia. If they succeed in ripping up the gas code, the gas can still be extracted and sent overseas, Mr Speaker. That's the big genius move by the Greens party, Mr Speaker.
Order.
We don't know the views of the opposition. They haven't declared their view. It's up for a vote in a few hours. But we know they like a gas-led recovery. The Greens also apparently support a gas-led recovery, just not one that's in Australia.
The call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Did the Prime Minister personally raise the serious issue of our sailors being harmed with President Xi?
The call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. At APEC, there were no bilateral formal meetings between myself and China. I had a range of conversations, private conversations, with people at APEC. And one of the things that characterises good diplomacy and foreign policy is that when you have a private conversation, just like when I have a private conversation with the Leader of the Opposition, Mr Speaker, when I have a private conversation with the Leader of the Opposition, it stays private. It stays private. That's what happens. That's how you get outcomes. That's how you build trust. That's how you defend Australia's national interest. But
Order. Members on my right. Prime Minister will pause. Prime Minister has been going through his meetings. He's answering the question. The Minister for Climate Change and Energy is warned. The Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr Speaker, on relevance, the Prime Minister, if he raises the issue of trust, needs to demonstrate it to the Australian people. Did he stand up for our sailors or not?
Resume your seat. The Leader of the Opposition needs to state the point of the order. That was about relevance. The Prime Minister has been answering the question, and he indicated about his conversations that he order. The Leader of the Opposition knows. The member for Moreton is warned. Prime Minister has the call.
Well, it's more about his anger issues, Mr Speaker, is what we see.
Order.
Is what we see yet again being demonstrated here.
Order.
We released
the member for Barker.
The information about the incident involving HMAS Toowoomba before previous incidents under both governments that have occurred, where protests have been made to China. We certainly have done that through all of the channels that you have seen and others that you have not, because that is the way that you deal with those things. We have been totally public and transparent and gone after these issues, defending the fact that our sailors were put in a position that they should never have been put in. And our primary concern was always standing up for the interests of Australians and our Defence Force. And you stand up for the interests of Australians by delivering a foreign policy and international relations that ensures that you're around the table and ensures that you're engaged. We have said we'll cooperate with China where we can, we'll disagree where we must. Those opposite disagreed where we could, and disagreed where we must, and disagreed full stop exclamation mark. That's not the way to deliver outcomes with our major trading partner. That's not the way to deliver outcomes in the interests of our nation as well. The truth is that under those opposite, our international relations with China, with France, with the United States, with Greece, with others, as you go around and you talk to international leaders, the damage that was done by the leaking of text messages
The Prime Minister's time
to France
has concluded. The Prime Minister's time has concluded. Order. There's far too much noise in the chamber. Give the call to the member for Reid.
My question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government addressing cost of living pressures for Australians, and what hurdles has it overcome to deliver cost of living relief?
Order. The members on my left. No, the Treasurer is going to resume his seat. I'm not going to do it this week. I'm going to do it the right way. The member for Reid will be heard in silence while she asks a question. That's how this week's going to roll. The member for Reid, I'm going to ask her to state the question, and she's going to be heard in silence. Shown respect. The member for Reid has the call.
My question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government addressing cost of living pressures for Australians, and what hurdles has it overcome to deliver cost of living relief?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As the wonderful member for Reid knows, inflation was highest in quarterly terms before the last election and in annual terms around the time of last Christmas. And it's moderated since then, but we do need it to moderate further, and we need it to moderate faster. But what's been clear around the world, and what we expect here, is that inflation doesn't always moderate in a straight line, and it remains to be seen whether or not we see that in the more volatile monthly figures later in the week. But cost of living pressures are the biggest concern around the kitchen tables of this country, and they are the biggest focus of the Cabinet table here in Canberra as well. We understand Australians are doing it tough, Mr Speaker, and that's why the government is rolling out billions of dollars in assistance for people under pressure. Electricity bill relief, cheaper medicines, cheaper childcare, increased rent assistance, increased income support, more bulk billing, expanding PPL, fee-free TAFE, building more affordable homes, getting wages moving again. And we're pleased to see a second consecutive quarter of real wages growth, Mr Speaker. Now, our cost of living plan is carefully designed and calibrated and targeted to take some of the edge off inflation rather than add to it. And the ABS said that our policies took 0.5 percentage point off inflation in the most recent data. Now, Mr Speaker, without our energy plan, electricity would have gone up 18.6%, not 4.2%. Without our rent assistance, rent would have gone up 2.5%, not 2.2%. Without our childcare policies, fees would have gone up 6.7%, not down by 13.2%. And I'm asked about the hurdles, Mr Speaker, and it's worth reminding the House that when those opposite voted against our cost of living help, they voted for higher inflation and they voted for lower wages. If they had their way, inflation would be higher and wages would be lower, and that's why we inherited real wages falling 3.4%, Mr Speaker. Honourable members should not forget this when they cry crocodile tears over the cost of living, Mr Speaker. Their nasty negativity is no substitute for economic credibility. Our responsible economic management is helping in the fight against inflation. The IMF said that when they handed down their report card. Fitch said that when they reaffirmed the AAA. The RBA governor said that when she was asked for estimates. Mr Speaker, we are rolling out cost of living help. We are getting the budget in much better nick. We are investing in skills and energy and housing and future growth. We are working for Australia and we are cleaning up the mess that those economic incompetents left behind.
For order, members on my left. Before I call the member for Brisbane, I just want to welcome some people to the parliament. I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today is Mr Wesley Streeting, the UK Shadow Secretary of State for Health and Social Care and member for Ilford North. I'd like to welcome the Mayor of the Gold Coast, His Worship Councillor Tom Tate, and a delegation from the Top End Aboriginal Coastal Alliance. A warm welcome to you all. I'll give the call to the honourable member for Brisbane.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. The RBA Governor has implied that everyday people need to stop spending money at the dentist to help reduce inflation. So, will you scrap Labor's Stage 3 tax cuts that give a $9,000 a year handout to politicians and the 1% and instead fund dental into Medicare to ease the cost of living and to reduce inflation?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the honourable member for his question. I think in my last answer I made our views on inflation and cost of living help pretty clear. Inflation is moderating in our economy, not as fast or as far as we would like, but it's moderating from the high quarterly peak that we inherited. The Reserve Bank Governor, as is appropriate, has made some comments about that in recent weeks, as have I. Our focus as a government is on rolling out those 10 different types of cost of living relief that I went through in some detail a moment ago.
Give the call to the honourable member for order. Members on my left. The member for Macarthur. Not sure what that was, but anyway. It'll cease and desist. May I call the member for Fremantle?
Thank you, Speaker. And my question is to the Prime Minister. What actions has the Albanese Labor government taken to reduce the cost of living pressures, including investments in strengthening Medicare and opening new urgent care clinics? How are these helping ordinary Australians, and what opposition has the government had to overcome?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Fremantle for his question, and he knows that our #1 priority is easing cost of living pressures. And there are three vital ways that you can tackle cost of living.
Members on my left will
you can get costs down for families, you can get wages up for workers, but you can also get the budget onto a stronger foundation, and we're doing all three. Our responsible budget management means that we can invest in cheaper medicines, affordable housing, energy bill relief, higher wages, cheaper childcare, while those opposites said no to all of the above. And I'm asked particularly about health care. We have the biggest investment in Medicare in its history, tripling the bulk billing incentive, providing support for 11 million Australians to see a GP for free. And we're opening 58 Medicare urgent care clinics right around the country, taking pressure off families and taking pressure off hospital emergency departments. And those opposite, the member for Barker, jokes that, they're making a difference. Well, they are making a difference, Mr Speaker. 75,000 presentations to these clinics means that 75,000 people who...
The member for Barker is now warned.
75,000 people who would have been waiting in emergency departments, often families with their kids with a broken arm or with another accident that had occurred, 1 in 3 patients have been under 15. Under 15. And the former leader of the National Party interjects with a broken wallet. Well, the truth is that you only need your Medicare card, not your credit card. Unlike his leader of the opposition, who wanted to impose a cost on every person who ever saw a doctor, with a co-payment. Nearly 1 in 3 visits have been on weekends. Nearly 1 in 3. And on weekdays, more than 1 in 5 visits have been after 6 p.m. We're strengthening Medicare. The Leader of the Opposition, of course, when he was Health Minister, tried to destroy it, tried to abolish bulk billing with a GP tax, wanted to increase the price of medicines with a medicine tax, and wanted to whack every single patient with a hospital tax when they turned up as well. No wonder he was voted Australia's worst ever health minister. Well, what we're doing is working to strengthen Medicare as part of our plan for strengthening Australia and working for Australia.
Give a call to the member for Hume.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Last Wednesday, the Reserve Bank Governor, Michelle Bullock, said inflation is homegrown. Homegrown. Why does Australia have core inflation that is amongst the highest of any advanced country?
Order. Members on my right and the Minister for Health will cease interjecting. Prime Minister has the call.
I'm asked a question about the economy by the Shadow Treasurer, who's incapable of asking the Treasurer of a question.
Order. The Shadow Treasurer has asked his question.
The fact is unemployment is at historic lows, 3.7%. The participation rate is at a record high. The gender pay gap is at a record low, but women's workforce participation is at a record high. Business investment is up, but the number of days lost to industrial disputes is down. Over 620,000 jobs have been created, more than under any first-term government in Australia's history, and we're only halfway through. We've seen 2 consecutive quarters of real wage growth, even though those opposite, when they were in government, argued that low wage growth was a key feature of their economic architecture. And when it comes to inflation, we know that inflation peaked in the March 2022 quarter. Now, what is it about March 2022?
Order.
What is it about March 2022? It was the last quarter. It was the last quarter that they were ever.
The member for Hume and the Treasurer will cease interjecting.
The last quarter is when it peaked. But of course, as well as that, under those opposite, and we recognise that fiscal policy has an impact on inflation, under us, the first budget surplus in 15 years. Something unrecognisable for those opposite who left a $78 billion deficit. We've got a $22 billion surplus.
The Prime Minister has concluded his answer. I'll give a call to the member for Lawler.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs. How is the Albanese Labor government keeping Australia safe? How is this approach different from other approaches?
Give a call to the Minister for Order. Members on my left. The member for Moncrieff is warned. It's highly disorderly before I call a minister to interject. The Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs has the call. The member for Herbert will leave the chamber under 94A. I want to be crystal clear with everyone. The time to interject is not before a minister speaks or during the question. The minister has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. For all of us on this side of the House, we take community safety very, very, very seriously. In fact, In fact,
Order.
it is our utmost
Order.
priority. As
Order.
can be
Members on my
demonstrated by
left.
the behaviour of those opposite. The behaviour of those opposite who never miss an opportunity to divide or deflect. Unlike them, Speaker, we are leaving
Order.
no stone unturned in our efforts to protect the community. The ABF and the AFP have been working closely with state
Member
and
for
territory
Deakin is
authorities
warned.
and law enforcement to ensure community safety. And I want to recognise that the work that they have been doing in recent weeks has been exceptional, absolutely exceptional, and I
Member
thank them for their
for-
hard work. I also say that the legislation that we've introduced today will make our laws more durable and get ahead of any future challenges. And this bill will make strong laws even stronger by creating new offences which deal with recently released detainees, including by making it an offence for some to work with
Order.
another person who's a minor or another vulnerable person, an offence for going near a school, childcare centre or daycare centre, an offence also for an individual to contact their victim or their victim's family. And we're doing this because it matters. We're doing this also, and this is really important, Speaker,
Order.
because it's not talking tough that keeps Australians safe. It's strong laws,
Order.
and a relentless focus on compliance. Two things that members opposite know very little about. Now, Speaker, I'm asked about contrast.
Order.
I'm asked about contrast, and I see reports in the media today that Liberal frontbencher Dean Smith wrote a letter requesting that a convicted pedophile be released from detention. Liberal frontbencher Senator Smith, who knew the seriousness
Order.
of this man's offending, but requested he be released anyway. Senator Smith wrote,
Order.
I believe that in the time that has passed, the man has demonstrated significant repose and repentance, alongside ongoing rehabilitation with the active support and guidance of the community of WA. Now, Speaker, he was saying
Order.
this about
The
a man
member for
convicted
Broome.
in 2015 of sex with a girl between 13 and 16 and who subsequently had his visa cancelled. Contrast this to the resolve
Order.
that we are showing, making tough laws tougher, strong laws stronger, and fundamentally too, fixing the mess left by those opposite, particularly by the Leader of the Opposition, the man who always is talking
Order.
loud
The
and
Minister's
saying
time
nothing.
has concluded. Give a call. Order. Members on my left and my right. There is far too much noise in the chamber. The member for Fairfax has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question goes to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. In media interviews over the weekend, the minister failed to answer questions on whether there is a cap on taxpayer money to be spent mopping up the minister's renewables-only energy policy via his newly announced Ponzi scheme. When will the minister come clean and disclose the true cost of this scheme, or has the minister again signed a blank cheque on behalf of taxpayers?
The member will just pause for a moment. The Minister for the Environment was interjecting right throughout that question. I couldn't hear it. Same rules for both sides. The member's going to be heard in silence, and he'll be heard again. And if anyone interjects, they will not be here to hear the answer. I'll give the call to the member for Fairfax.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question goes to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. In media interviews over the weekend, the minister failed to answer questions on whether there is a cap on taxpayer money to be spent mopping up the minister's renewables-only energy policy via his newly announced Ponzi scheme. When will the minister come clean and disclose the true cost of this scheme, or has the minister again signed a blank cheque on behalf of taxpayers?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for his question. It's the last sitting week of the year, and the honourable member just rustled up his fourth question to me all year, Mr Speaker. So congratulations. Took you all year to get 4 questions, which is a great achievement. The Treasurer's worried about productivity. You might want to have a look at the member for Fairfax. Now, the member for Fairfax asked me about the capacity investment scheme, which is a very important investment and a very important scheme to ensure that we are getting reliable energy into the system. And it works as an auction. Now, Mr Speaker, it is quite common practice in governments of all levels when you are conducting an auction to say that it is commercial in confidence, and that makes sense. That's why the New South Wales Liberal government, when they introduced their equivalent scheme, kept the cost commercial in confidence. That's the way it works in Western Australia. It's a concept we hear from the member for Hume. It's a concept he might be familiar with, because when he announced the UNGI scheme, Underwriting New Generation, which could have been better called, unfortunately, No Generation Involved, because actually there was not a one what. But he said when he was asked, well, look, these discussions are commercial in confidence, and I'm not going to go into the details of them here and now. My old friend, the former member for Flinders, Greg Hunt, when he was bringing down the emissions reduction, if I remember that, direct action, one of the 26 failed energy policies, he was asked the cost, and he said, well, the Clean Energy Regulator could run tender rounds to select eligible offers on a lowest cost priority basis. The benchmark would be commercial in confidence to encourage businesses to submit their lowest prices. There's an even bigger example, Mr Speaker, than member for Cook. The member for Cook, I'm not sure in which capacity the member for Cook was speaking on this.
The minister will pause. The member for Fairfax on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, the minister is being evasive.
The point
of order is one of relevance.
That's fine.
Because the question went to when the minister will advise on the true cost of his scheme, a question he is yet to come to in his answer.
Resume your seat. The minister was not asked about alternative proposals in the question. I'm going to refer him back to the question. He's had 2 minutes so far. I'll listen to him carefully. If he strays any further, he'll be sat down.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, I'm referring, of course, to why such schemes are commercial in confidence in keeping with traditional budget treatment. And this is being treated in the same regards as every other similar matter in the budget. The member for Cook was asked about his very successful deal with the French on the submarines, Mr Speaker. And he said, when he was asked about the costs, well, those are commercial in confidence matters on a very cheap contract for the French for the submarines, Mr Speaker. He went on. The member for Cook also said this
the minister will pause. He needs to refine his remarks to the question. If he strays one more time, he'll be sat down.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.
You return to the question. The minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The honourable member asked me about the capacity investment scheme, which I very much welcome his interest. I understand his interest, and it is being treated and will be treated in the same way as similar matters have been treated in budgets in time immemorial.
The call to the honourable member for give the call to the member for Hunter.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Home Affairs. Why is it necessary for the government to introduce legislation to strip the citizenship of people convicted of serious crimes against Australia? How else is the Albanese Labor government keeping Australians safe, and what obstacles does the government face?
Call to the Minister for Home Affairs and the Minister for Cybersecurity.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. And the member is correct. We are introducing legislation that will enable Australian citizenship to be stripped from individuals who represent a serious danger to our country. And the way these laws are framed, Speaker, is that it articulates conduct that may occur which is actually so offensive to the values of community safety and to the values of Australian citizenship that the individual at the heart of the matter themselves repudiate the fact that they are Australian. Now, Speaker, this legislation is very important, and the House would be aware that there is a long and frankly highly politicised history of this matter being dealt with by the parliament. In fact, those opposite had 2 completely failed attempts to deliver laws that affected this exact outcome, one in 2015 and one in 2019.
Member for Latrobe.
I'd remind the parliament that the laws that were introduced in 2015 were actually so unworkable that the government that introduced them 4 years later repealed them completely. And the second go that the opposition leader led didn't do much better. It was ruled unconstitutional over the past 18 months. So we had 2 citizenship laws introduced in 2019, both of them ruled unconstitutional by the High Court in the last 18 months. Now, Speaker, I'm asked if the bill that we're introducing is the only thing we are doing to keep Australians safe, and of course, Mr Speaker, that's not the case, not by a long shot. The primary purpose of our government is to ensure the safety of Australians, and we came to office with an enormous set of issues facing us, in particular in the Home Affairs Department. One of those was the broken migration system, Speaker, that I've spoken to the House about before. We had a system which a report by Christine Nixon, a former police commissioner in Victoria, told us was enabling sexual exploitation and human trafficking. And thanks to the Nixon report, we know just how much wrongdoing actually occurred under the Leader of the Opposition when he was running this portfolio. Speaker, what we saw is that many of the individuals that were engaged in the most egregious infringements on human rights and safety of people in our country came into the country under the Leader of the Opposition's watch. Now, Speaker, instead of dealing what were very serious issues, not just highlighted by the Nixon review, but in fact highlighted over a series of reports that spanned the almost entire life of the former government, the Leader of the Opposition talked a big game, but when it came down to it, he cut funding for immigration compliance and made sure that our borders were not secure. Now, Speaker, our government is taking a very different and deliberate approach, and if there is one thing that we can take from the citizenship matter that will be before the parliament this week, it is this. Laws that don't work don't make us any safer. They actually make us more dangerous. And what we are doing on this side of the House is doing the hard work, making sure that our laws actually are constitutional in order to protect our country. That's what we're here for. Thanks, Speaker.
Give a call to the Leader of the Nationals.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Environment and Water. The Minister for Agriculture has stated in the Senate, "We certainly acknowledge that renewable energy infrastructure will impact on a significant amount of land within Australia." Minister, how many hectares of native vegetation will be destroyed by renewable energy projects facilitated to meet the government's target of 82% renewables by 2030?
Great question. Call to the Minister for the Environment and Water.
Thanks very much. And isn't it remarkable, for the first time ever, you've got the National Party worried about land clearing? In fact, the National Party in the past, we know the Shadow
Leader of the
Treasurer
Nationals has asked his question.
Yeah, the Shadow Treasurer argued that grasslands that was illegally cleared should be retrospectively acknowledged to not have been endangered. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, of course, renewable energy projects. Of course, renewable energy projects, solar farms, wind farms, transmission lines and hydroelectricity, all of them will be assessed in the same way that any other project will be assessed under our environmental laws. Whether it is a new housing development, whether it is a road, whether it is a rail project, whether it is a transmission line, it will be assessed in the same way. And of course, if they have unacceptable impacts on the environment, they will be refused, as any other project would be. The Leader of the National Party has asked how many hectares. Well, of course, that depends on which projects. We're at the very beginning of a— Well,
the Leader of the Nationals
the Leader of the Nationals is interjecting with the most ridiculous interjections. There is no way of knowing a number of hectares until we know which projects will be approved.
The Minister will pause. The Minister will pause. The Leader of the Nationals is now warned. If he interjects the remainder of this question, he won't be here. The Minister has the call.
Right now I have over 100 renewable energy projects before me. We have approved as a government about 10 times as many renewable energy projects as other energy projects. We continue to approve and support renewable energy projects because we know the biggest difference we can make to the environment for this country and for our planet is to move effectively to zero net emissions And I'm very proud of the fact that this government has
Member
a
Gippsland.
serious energy program, in contrast to those opposite who had 24 different energy programs and didn't deliver a single one of them. We will continue to work with energy proponents, renewable energy proponents, with local communities to make sure we get this right, so that we can transition to a renewable energy economy while protecting our environment at the same time.
Call to the honourable member for Canberra.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. How is the Albanese Labor government strengthening Medicare and delivering cheaper medicines to Australians? And why is it needed after a decade of cuts and neglect to healthcare?
Call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the terrific member for Canberra for her question. She has been such a strong advocate for better and cheaper healthcare in her seat here in the ACT, and she campaigned so hard on Labor's promise last year to strengthen Medicare and to make medicines cheaper. And this government is delivering on her promise, Mr Speaker, tripling the bulk billing incentive, rolling out, as the Prime Minister said, a network of 58 Medicare urgent care clinics and making medicines cheaper. Last year, Mr Speaker, we slashed the maximum amount that pensioners and concession card holders would pay across a given year for all of their medicines needs by a quarter, by 25%. And that means this year, Mr Speaker, around 2 million people on the pension or holding a concession card have paid up to 25% less for their medicines. And in just 10 months after we delivered the biggest cut to the price of medicines in the 75-year history of the PBS, there have been almost 500,000 cheaper scripts issued here in the ACT. Across the nation, every single month, Australians are saving around $20 million just because of that one single measure. And the member for Canberra has also been a really strong advocate for better bulk billing arrangements, Mr Speaker, because here in the ACT we see some of the lowest rates of bulk billing anywhere in the country. Our government's tripling of the bulk billing incentive, which took effect on the 1st of November, is a game-changer, to use the language of the College of GPs, a game-changer. And it's early days, Mr Speaker, but we are already seeing this historic investment make a real difference. Last sitting, a couple of weeks ago, I talked about a clinic in Magnetic Island, in the member for Herbert's electorate. He's not here right now at the question time, but in his electorate, a clinic that had returned from private billing to bulk billing because of our measure. And last week, Mr Speaker, a clinic in Caringbah, in the member for Cook's electorate, reported an increase in bulk billing rates from September, where about half of patients were bulk billed at that big clinic, to 2/3 being bulk billed in November, just 2 months later. And for this side of the House, and for the member for Canberra, Mr Speaker, that really matters. That really matters, because bulk billing for us, for the Labor Party, is the beating heart of Medicare, and that is the big difference in health policy. While Labor tripled the bulk billing incentive, a record investment, the Leader of the Opposition, when he was Health Minister, tried to abolish bulk billing altogether and make every single Australian pay a fee every single time they visited the doctor. And while Labor is making medicines cheaper, Mr Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition, when he was Health Minister, tried to make medicines more expensive by jacking up the price of medicines by up to $5 a script. That is the difference between them and us.
Has concluded. The call to the honourable member for Goldstein.
To the Prime Minister. February will mark 10 years since Rosie Batty's son Luke was killed by his father. Rosie is in this place today, still advocating for women and children, yet 54 women have been killed so far this year, and children are still being killed by parents once a fortnight. The government's plan to reduce deaths by 25% year on year has failed in 2023. What will you do differently next year to stop women and children from being murdered?
Call to the Prime Minister. The member for Fisher will leave the chamber under 94A. Not to interject before an answer even begins. Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for her question and for her genuine commitment, along with other members of this House, to eliminate violence against women and children. And I acknowledge Rosie Batty. I'm not sure if she's here in the gallery, but I acknowledge her in the House. She is a great Australian. And she took a tragedy and turned it into a motivation to make a difference for others. One life lost to domestic and family violence is one too many. But this year, as with every year, it has been one life lost after another. Recent tragedies have starkly reminded us that family and domestic violence recognises no social, economic or cultural barriers. But while it's indiscriminate, it certainly is not inevitable. We can't keep accepting this violence as inevitable because it is unacceptable. During 16 days of activism, I want to reiterate the government's commitment to ending violence against women and children in one generation. We must treat this violence as something we can end and focus all our efforts on doing so, because there's no time to waste. Men in particular have to step up. Male leaders have an opportunity to champion change and to create the conditions that prevent violence, abuse, discrimination and harassment. My government is taking immediate and practical action. We have record investment of $2.3 billion in this area. Ministers across government working to end family, domestic and sexual violence. We've fixed the escaping violence payment, reducing the time it takes victim survivors to access support by 22 days. We've extended funding for states and territories to deliver frontline services, including ones that were due to just end. We've delivered on our commitment of new frontline and community sector workers to support victim survivors. We've legislated for 10 days of family and domestic violence leave for all employees, including casuals. We've made family law reform a priority to make the family law system simpler and safer for people fleeing violence. We've responded to sexual violence in university settings and through respectful relationships education. This is a scourge on our society. I thank the member very much for her question, and I do note the colour scheme representing the 16 days campaign which is on. We need 16 days of activism, but we need 365 days a year of action and commitment to rid our society of this scourge.
And on indulgence, the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, I join in supporting the Prime Minister's very strong words, and when we were in government, measures we undertook were supported by the then opposition, and we continue in that bipartisan spirit. Congratulate the member for her question, and like everybody in this place, we should be dedicated to the elimination of violence against women and children. There are some programs which are working very effectively, and a frustration within those organisations as you talk to those advocates about how you can scale that up and how they can get the year of government to replicate their success across the country. There are some horrific cases, and the human cost, not just to the individual family and the loved ones left behind, but to society, is quite astounding, and we will do everything that is humanly possible to support the work by the government, by the state and territory governments and other NGOs in bringing an end to this terrible scourge.
Give the call to the honourable member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And my question is to the Minister for Workplace Relations. How has the Albanese Labor government engaged with business groups on the closing loopholes legislation, and what has been the response?
Give the call to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations and the Minister for the Arts.
Thanks very much, Speaker. And I thank the member for Robertson for the question, and note that his local area of Robertson has gone from having somebody who was passionately committed to low wages being a deliberate design feature of Australia's economic architecture to now being represented by someone who proudly wants to get wages moving in Australia.
Order. Order. Member for Groom will cease interjecting.
Can I take the interjection? Because the member for Groom might not be aware that for the last 6 months real wages have grown. real wages have grown in the last 6 months, notwithstanding that when they were last in office, they fell by 3.5%. That's the figures that we were given in their final quarter. So, yes, the policies of the government are making a difference. Yes, people are still doing it tough and more needs to be done. And those opposite are about to get a chance to do more when the final votes happen on the Closing Loopholes bill. And that's exactly the issue that the member for Robertson has asked me about, because the member for Robertson has asked about the business consultation. And there are different attitudes from different business groups. Effectively, there are some business groups who have members where, for those individual members, they are using these loopholes to underpay people. That's what they're doing. And some of them have significant financial gain to be made by this bill not going forward, and every day it is delayed is a day that is better for them to be able to continue underpaying their workforce. And so I noticed today the ads are back. Now, I noticed the ads back in one of the papers. Now, a while ago when the ads first started, you could have forgiven the groups that were funding them because they hadn't seen the bill yet, so maybe they didn't know that the ads involved misinformation. Maybe they didn't know that this concept that you would be compelled to pay a brand-new worker the same as your most experienced worker was not going to turn up in the ledge. Well, now they've seen the legislation, it's there in black and white, and it's made no difference to the advertising at all. Because what those organisations are wanting to do is they're wanting to delay, they're wanting to complain about consultation that initially they were part of and then said can they no longer be involved in confidential conversation, and then they want to talk about something that the issue is not. But contrast that to the groups that have engaged. Contrast that to the Hotels Association, engaged professionally, and now as a result tomorrow I'll introduce amendments to the casuals provisions. Compare that to Uber, Menulog and DoorDash. Engage constructively, there'll be amendments to the gig provisions, specifically making sure that we meet the purposes of legislation. And compare that to the peak body representing the industrial interests of the resources industry, AREA. Hardly a member of the Labor Party, but a professional organisation that has represented its members, and there'll be amendments as a result.
Call to the Honourable the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. It's over 1 month since Australians emphatically rejected the Albanese government's divisive voice proposal. Will the Prime Minister confirm the Albanese Labor government still remains committed to implementing treaty and truth-telling?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the Deputy Leader of the Opposition for her question. And I note that one of the things that we have said about the referendum is that we respect the outcome. We respect the outcome that was made on October the 14th. Prior to October the 14th, I stood at this dispatch box and they were trying to say that what people were voting on was treaty. They might recall that. And I indicated at this dispatch box that that wasn't what people were voting on, that indeed treaty negotiations are underway at state level, not at federal level. There is no treaty negotiations underway by the federal government, and those negotiations are at different points in Victoria, in Queensland, where the Queensland LNP said that they supported it. And they said that they supported it, and they voted for the legislation. They voted for the legislation. They voted for it before they were against it.
Order.
How can I not be more?
The Prime Minister will pause. The Prime Minister has completed his answer. We'll move to the next question. Order. Order. Give the call to the member for Solomon.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Home Affairs. How has the Albanese Labor government responded to the findings in the report handed down by the Australian Public Service Commissioner?
Give the call to the Minister for Home Affairs and the Minister for Cyber Security.
Thank you so much, Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. Mr Speaker, our government places extremely high value on the professionalism and integrity of the Australian Public Service. There was extensive media reporting undertaken in late September this year, which raised a number of questions about the conduct of the Secretary of my department at the time, Mr Pezzullo. We regard these matters as very serious, and they required a serious investigation to get to the bottom of what happened. The Parliament would be aware that as soon as I became aware of these allegations, I referred the matter to the Australian Public Service Commissioner. The Australian Public Service Commissioner then conducted a lengthy, proper investigation of the conduct, and the report into that matter has been finalised and handed to the Prime Minister. The report found multiple breaches of the Australian Public Service Code of Conduct by Mr Pezzullo. Ms Briggs, who ran the inquiry, determined that Mr Pezzullo breached the Australian Public Service Code of Conduct on at least 14 occasions in relation to 5 overarching allegations, those allegations being that Mr Pezzullo used his duty, power, status or authority to seek or gain benefit or advantage for himself, that he engaged in gossip and disrespectful critique of ministers and public servants, that he failed to maintain confidentiality of sensitive government information, that he failed to act apolitically in his employment, and that he failed to disclose a conflict of interest. Based on those findings and at the recommendation of Ms Briggs, Mr Pezzullo's appointment as the Secretary of my department has been terminated. Speaker, what does this say about our government and our approach to the business of the work we do? We have profound respect for the frank and fearless advice that the Australian Public Service has a great history of providing to Australian governments. We value proper process. We value the integrity of the Australian Public Service. Indeed, Speaker, we insist on it.
Call to the honourable member for Warringah.
To the Prime Minister. With respect, the member for Goldstein's question was the first to address domestic and family violence in this place. Many talk about keeping communities safe, but we are failing women and children, a woman a week and a child every 2 weeks. And yet we talk of keeping communities safe. Both sides of parliament came together to pass urgent legislation following the High Court's decision. Where is the urgency, the national emergency, when it comes to women and children? With respect, 10 years is not good enough.
I give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Warringah for her question. My government came to office with a clear commitment to increase funding, including for community service workers dealing with violence against women and children. I announced it at Queanbeyan with the now member for Eden Monaro. I'm not sure if the fine minister was the member at the time, and with the shadow minister Linda Burney. We announced the most significant expansion, and we put the money in the budget. And now there are people working to protect women and children from domestic violence because of that. One of the first pieces of legislation that we introduced in this parliament was for 10 days paid domestic and family violence leave. One of the very first now in place as a result of my government's actions. We ensured in our budget process, in the 2 budgets handed down by the Treasurer, that wherever funding was due to fall over, we provided the funding that in many cases was due to stop on the 30th of June after we came to office. We went through it line by line, including in places like—
Order. The Prime Minister will pause. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition on point of order.
Could the Prime Minister just
resume your seat? I want to hear what the point of order is. You need to state what the point of order is.
A point of order on relevance, Mr Speaker. Could the Prime Minister refine his tone given the subject matter we are discussing?
Resume your seat. That is not a point of order. That is an abuse of the standing orders of the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. The Prime Minister is being directly relevant to the question and outlining the government's response. He has the call.
I'm passionate about the issue of family and domestic violence and doing something about it, because I know the impact that it has. I've been there. And I'm determined to make sure that my government, while we are in office, makes a difference each and every day. And at each and every opportunity that we have had around the Cabinet table, led by, it must be said, the Minister for the Status of Women, Katy Gallagher, and Minister Amanda Rishworth, and Minister Bill Shorten, who have particular responsibilities in these areas, but particularly led by Katy Gallagher. She is, if there has been a stronger advocate for women ever elected to either chamber in this place, I have not seen them. That's right. And so we will continue to do what we can, and I would hope that we do so in a way reflected by the Leader of the Opposition's last comments in response to the question that I received, in a bipartisan way. And I accept, for example, that the Leader of the Opposition took some measures when he was Minister, particularly aimed at children and those issues. And these issues certainly should remain bipartisan. I assure the member for Warringah that I will continue to be a strong advocate, but I'm very proud of what my government has done. Has it been perfect? No, because these issues aren't perfect. They take time. And it's not just a matter of government, it's a matter of every bloke having a conversation. That's right. Around the pub, at the footy, calling it out when they see that it's wrong. Men have a responsibility. Men are in a position to make a difference with their peers. This needs to be not just a government response, this needs to be a whole-of-society response. And that is what I am committed to as a matter of urgency.
No indulgence, the Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr Speaker, I want to support the Prime Minister in his comments that he's just made. I want to say to the member for Warringah, I'm sure that her sentiment is heartfelt, but this is not an issue for point scoring or political difference. The Australian public should hear that there is no difference between either side, anybody in this chamber, in relation to this most serious issue. Every government, including this government, has dedicated themselves to doing the best to reduce violence, through funding, through programs, through innovation, and the support that the Prime Minister expects from all of us is forthcoming, will be forthcoming, Prime Minister, and I don't believe it's a fair critique of the government that they haven't done enough, or that they're not doing enough, or that they don't have intention to act properly in this space. I don't think that's the view of the Prime Minister at all, and I think it mischaracterises the approach of the government. And the approach of the opposition will be to support it. As the Prime Minister rightly points out, the establishment of the Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation was supported on a bipartisan basis, and it saved literally thousands of children, supported women in domestic violence situations where children are being sexually offended against. And the strongest message that we can send from this chamber to the Australian public is that we stand united to condemn it. And as the Prime Minister rightly points out, all of us should have conversations, and regular conversations, with our sons, with our nephews, with others that we influence. And we need to call out in the workplace or anywhere else the atrocious conversation or demeaning behaviour or conduct that some might seek to pursue. And this is not an issue where there is a cigarette paper of difference between the government and the opposition, and nor should there be with the crossbench or anyone else in this place.
Give a call to the honourable member for Bendigo.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Industry and Science. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to support Australian manufacturers to grow and to commercialise their ideas after a decade of neglect?
Give a call to the Minister for Industry and Science.
Thank you, Speaker, and thanks to the member for Bendigo, another champion of regional manufacturing, and who knows that Australians want their nation to be a place that makes things, because a country that makes things makes great jobs, secure, well-paying jobs across our suburbs and across our regions. And the Labor government recognises too and believes in a future made in Australia, but that will take a lot of work to achieve that vision.
Order.
Now, today, a new report was released by Industry, Innovation and Science Australia that found we need to scale up our businesses to help rebuild manufacturing. The report also shows the government's inherited a shrinking middle band of businesses. The proportion of medium-sized businesses in manufacturing has declined by close to 40% in the last 14 years. And that's why the government's taking action to help businesses that want to grow and scale up. Today, our government's $392 million industry growth program, announced in the budget, that has kicked off officially today. And as of today, businesses will be able to apply for expert advice on getting their good ideas to market and expanding their companies. Future rounds of the program will also deliver match grant funding ranging from $50,000 to $5 million to give businesses the capital they need to grow, and it will provide a pipeline of medium-sized businesses who can access the $15 billion National Reconstruction Fund. Now, there was a reference to a decade of neglect, and boy, we've got a lot of work with there. The Liberals and Nationals, they came to office looking down their nose at Australian manufacturing, hounded car manufacturers out of the country. Under their watch, we ended up with some of the lowest manufacturing self-sufficiency in the OECD, and today's report shows a contraction in the number of mid-sized manufacturers. Now, after all that, the coalition scrambled, recognising the grave error of their ways. They announced in October 2020 a $1.5 billion manufacturing grants program, and guess when 85% of those grants were announced? In the weeks leading into the 2022 federal election.
Order.
Always there to manufacture a headline, but never there to back Australian manufacturing. And continuing today, refused to back the National Reconstruction Fund, refused to back energy price relief that would have helped manufacturers. And I'll take the interjection. Thank you so much for that. The deputy leader was a member of a government that said EVs would ruin and end the weekend, but now supports the manufacture of the charging equipment of the cars they don't want on the roads. I mean, this is the confused state of support for manufacturing by those opposite, and Australian manufacturing deserves.
The time has concluded. The minister will just resume his seat. So I can hear from the member for Flinders.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Given that Australians have already seen their power bills go up by $1,000 since the Albanese government came to power, and the government has just committed to a Ponzi scheme as it tries to mop up its renewables-only energy policy, can the minister guarantee that this Ponzi scheme will not—
The Minister for Infrastructure is warned. We're just going to hear that question from the top, and the member for Flinders has the call.
My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Given that Australians have already seen their power bills go up by $1,000 since the Albanese government came to power, and the government has just committed to a Ponzi scheme as it tries to mop up its renewables-only energy policy, can the minister guarantee that this Ponzi scheme will not see Australians facing yet another $1,000 increase in their power bills?
Just want to hear from the Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, there's a term used twice in that question with respect to schemes, which makes the question clearly out of order.
Just hear the order. I think the question can be phrased to enable that term, but just not the way it currently is now. The Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, Mr Speaker, this wording has already been accepted in an earlier question. The Leader can't be, making up objections on the fly here.
Just to assist the House, if the member can rephrase the question just around that portion of the question. to perhaps just rephrase that part, just to assist the House so we can order. The member for Fairfax isn't helping, so just give the member for Flinders the benefit of the doubt and just get her to state the question.
My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Given that Australians have already seen their power bills go up by $1,000 since the Albanese government came to power, and the government has just committed to a scheme to mop up its renewables-only energy policy, can the minister guarantee that this scheme will not see Australians facing yet another $1,000 increase in their energy bills?
Minister for Climate Change and Energy has the call.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for her question, and I particularly welcome it when the opposition just underlines how much they hate renewable energy and how they don't get that it's the cheapest form of energy. The honourable member should share that question with her electorate and show them what she really thinks of renewable energy, Mr Speaker, and I'm happy to assist. Now, Mr Speaker, we know on this side of the House that renewable energy is the cheapest form of energy, and getting more of it into the system means lower prices. Mr Speaker, I'm not the only one who thinks it, Mr Speaker. In response to the announcement last week, those well-known socialists down at the Australian Aluminium Council said the Australian Aluminium Council welcomes the expansion of the Capacity Investment Scheme, bringing forward investment and placing downward pressure on electricity prices for consumers, including industry and households. The AI Group, the Australian Industry Group, said today's announcement of the expansion of the Capacity Investment Scheme will greatly expand the scope of capacity contracts from the federal government and looks like a very helpful step to address fears of inadequate supply on price and reliability this decade, Mr Speaker. The Energy Users Association of Australia said, "We welcome the announcement from the Commonwealth as it would provide a level of certainty for investors and consumers in these highly volatile times. We expect this approach will help facilitate the deployment of renewable energy and storage technology whilst working to shield Australian households and businesses from significant increases in energy costs." I could go on, Mr Speaker. Group after group, peak group after peak group, who know that a more orderly transition, getting more investment on it more early, getting more dispatchable energy into the grid is good for prices, good for reliability and good for emissions. The only people who don't get it are the opposition. Now, they've still got their little fantasy wrapped in a delusion, nuclear energy. The leader of the National Party, to his credit, on Friday was honest. He came out and said, well, we don't expect nuclear energy in the next decade or so, but we've got till 2050, he said. I've got news for the leader of the National Party. We don't have to 2050 because we've got to improve reliability in the energy grid today. Today. I don't think we should wait until 2050, Mr Speaker. As coal-fired power ages and becomes more unreliable, we need more investment today. The leader of the National Party and his cohort might be happy to leave fixing that till 2050. They spent 9 years not fixing it. They might as well spend till 2050 not fixing it, Mr Speaker.
Far too much noise during that answer. Give the call to the member for Gilmore.
My question is to the Minister for Financial Services. How is the Albanese Labor government supporting Australians and taking the fight up to scammers? What has the response been?
Call to the Assistant Treasurer and Minister for Financial Services.
Thanks, Speaker. And can I thank the fabulous member for Gilmore for this question. I know the fact that she's been campaigning for over 2 years on this important issue. I remember attending a forum in her electorate back in 2021 where she pointed out to me that her constituents have been left to fight on their own against the scammers who are ripping off $3 billion from Australian households and small businesses. She pointed out to me back then that the Morrison government was leaving these people on their own to fight against these criminals. Well, things have changed. Things have changed, and under this government we have a comprehensive policy to take the fight up to these criminals. It includes an $86 million investment to establish a new national anti-scam centre. We've got the Australian Securities and Investment Commission pulling down fake investment websites. Over 2,500 fake investment websites have been pulled down because of that investment. And with the great work of the Minister for Communications, we've got the Australian Communications and Media Authority putting in place a new SMS ID registry to block those annoying SMSs that are coming through, a major vector for scammers.
Order.
There are early signs
Order.
that it is working. I'm pleased to inform the House that the first quarterly report of the National Anti-Scam Centre was released today, and it has shown that there has been a 16% decrease in overall scam losses. Investment scams for the first time down by 6%. Romance scams. Now, there wouldn't be a member in the place who hasn't had a constituent come to them and talk to them about the horror and the heartbreak of a romance scam. Down by 28% over the quarter. This is a great result. In fact, the month of September has seen the lowest monthly loss since October 2021. There is more to come, with new codes of practice to be rolled out over the year ahead. I've been asked about the stakeholders' response. Well, it's been fantastic. On Friday, I stood up with the Australian Bankers Association and COBA to support a new package, a banking accord, which will put new measures in place to keep Australians' money safe. Order. It includes confirmation of payee and a range of other measures to help bank customers keep their money safe, broadly supported by consumer organisations. But there is one stakeholder who is not yet on board.
Order.
One stakeholder who is not yet on board, because in government they could not have been less interested in consumers. And it has been over 7 months since they've had a minister responsible for consumer affairs. They are not interested in consumers. They're not interested in taking on the scammers.
Order. The minister's time has concluded. Call to the member for Casey.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister guarantee that there will be no changes to the tax treatment of the family home during his period as Prime Minister?
Order. Members on my right, I'll give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. The family home, they've run out of questions clearly when they ask about the family home, because that's in the that's in the drawer at the bottom. When you want to, when you're characterised by trying to run scare campaigns and fear campaigns about everything, then you pull out the drawer and it says they're coming for your home. But of course, that was run during the referendum as well, where First Nations people were going to take people's homes. That was the argument that was run on social media. That was run. I do, but you can respect the outcome, but still be critical of someone saying on the basis of the obvious that Aboriginals were going to take your home is something that isn't acceptable. That isn't acceptable. The family home is something in Australia that is, of course, very important, and the family home is something that. Well, who's ruling anything in? This is just absurd. This is just absurd.
Members on my left.
We regard the family home. The family home as being essential.
Order.
And you know what we're committed to? Not just support for family homes and for people to be in their family homes. We want more of them, Mr. Speaker. That's why they voted against it.
Prime Minister, has the Prime Minister concluded his answer?
No.
The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Well, obviously on relevance, Mr. Speaker, this is a question that requires a straight answer, yes or no, Prime Minister.
Resume your seat.
Can you be truthful to—
Order. Resume your seat. The Leader of the Opposition is entitled to raise order. The Leader of the Opposition is entitled to raise a point of order. Just needs to clearly state and cannot compel a type of answer that he would like, and can't allege that the Prime Minister has done something. Just moving forward, If you're going to raise points of order, you're able to do it under relevance, but the Prime Minister can answer the question. The Leader of the House.
Can the Leader of the Opposition withdraw? It was a clear abuse. It was clearly aimed at the Prime Minister. Can he withdraw?
The order. The member for Fadden will cease interjecting or be warned. I'm just going to ask the Leader of the Opposition if he's. I didn't hear the allegation. If he's mentioned something that's unparliamentary or reflecting on a member, I'll ask him to. Order. The Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting immediately, or he'll be warned. The Prime Minister has the call.
He's very angry, Mr. Speaker. He's angry because he knows he voted against more Australians getting into a home. He voted against the Housing Australia Future Fund. He didn't support increased rental assistance. He didn't support our program for investment to improve more private rentals. He's opposed to every single housing measure that's put forward by this government, and our housing measures are aimed at getting more Australians into homes. And this week we'll be introducing our legislation for the Help to Buy scheme, which will be a national scheme that will assist more Australians to get into homes, and we'll wait and see whether they do what they always do and just say no to that as well.
Order. The House comes to order. We'll hear from the member for Lalor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How has the government expanded the Capacity Investment Scheme, and how has it been received?
The call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Lalor for her question. And last week we announced the expansion of the Capacity Investment Scheme, something that was supported by those opposite. They don't seem to realise that when they write the questions. When they write the questions, they don't seem to realise that. And in its simplest form, this scheme is designed to make sure that new energy projects are coming online before older energy projects leave.
Order. The member for
Now,
Hume.
those opposite presided over 4 gigawatts leaving the system and 1 gigawatt coming on. We on this side are making sure that we can delivering more reliable energy to all Australians. And it's already working in New South Wales and being piloted in other states. The single joint tender announced last week with the New South Wales government will deliver more power into the New South Wales grid than the LNP managed to deliver over the past decade for the whole national electricity market. Just bear that in mind. The whole market, over 10 years, we have delivered more with one pilot scheme in New South Wales. Under the last government, 24 of Australia's 28 coal plants announced their closure dates. 24 out of 28. But did they put in place anything to replace it? No, they didn't. And that is why it was such a dangerous and irresponsible approach. But that's why we've stepped in to clean up the mess. This will add around 32 gigawatts of new capacity across the country, equivalent to about half of the current East Coast electricity grid. And that's why it has been welcomed. Innes Willicks from the AI Group has said a very helpful step to addressing fears that inadequate supply would pose to price and reliability this decade. Andrew Richards from the Energy Users Association. We welcome the announcement from the Commonwealth, as it should provide a level of certainty for investors and consumers in these highly volatile times. Nick Carter, the CEO of BlackRock, owned Acacia Energy. It's a great policy that the government has put in place, so we'll definitely be looking at that as they roll it out now across the next states. Super funds. Debbie Blakey, today's announcement by the federal government opens the doors to investors like Hester to play a more significant role in Australia's energy transition. This is about encouraging private sector investment to fill the void that will be created as closures occur, making sure that there aren't energy shortages around the country, making sure that the system is more reliable. And on that note, Mr Speaker, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
The Prime Minister has indicated he will add to an answer.